When Ohio State played Kentucky the other day in the CBS Classic, we got as a result a really weird statistical game. They were actually quite even across the board. I mean, yes, there's a little bit of a gap in the field goal percentage, but I mean, like the 3 point percentage is almost the exact same, 30 to 30.4. Ohio State out rebounded them, but they also had more turnovers than Kentucky. So, statistically, they're very similar, and the score even kind of reflects that. It was only a 6 point game. Where the game really was different and how Ohio State won was fouls. Fouls, fouls, and more fouls. The foul count is 25 to 15. And when you look into the advanced stats and when wait for these to load, you can kind of see that even still that's even. Like they even had the exact same points per possession. But it's just the fouling. Look at the points per shot type. So 2 point shots and 3 point shots, Ohio State scored a combined 80% of their points. Actually, that's not correct. 70% of their points from field goal shots. That means 30% of their points or 21 points came from free throws, whereas only 8% or 12% of Kentucky's points came from free throws. So that huge difference in free throws, what are we looking at? We're looking at almost 13 points came from, and 6 point final score came from free throws and fouls. So that's how Ohio State won this game, was getting to the free throw line. And we can see from the shooting stats, like if we look over here at the shooting chart, that's just because they had a very dominant game inside. Like Ohio State shot quite poorly, especially for them from the perimeter. 3 for 10, 1 for 3, 0 for 3. Really poor outside shooting. But when we look at inside, they were 10 for 16, 3 for 4, 3 for 3. So really strong inside shooting performance. Same with Kentucky. Kentucky also shot actually quite well, like inside the arc. So, we got 2 for 4, 2 for 3, 2 for 3, 1 for 1, 12 for 20, 1 for 1. So quite solid shooting, a lot of green. Some pretty hard reds there for 0-4, but a lot of green. And then you come out to the perimeter and they were 3 for 12 or 0 for 5. So quite similar statistically when it comes to shooting stats. It's just those fouls, 12-point difference that almost came purely from free throw scoring, or 13. Now, individually from Ohio State, kind of DJ Carden and EJ Liddell came out of this game as kind of getting a lot of the coverage for being Ohio State's star freshman and getting a lot of, praise for being the foundation going forward. However, when you look at the stats, yes, they scored quite well. If we come back into the basic box score, Carton got, once it pops up, 15 points, and Liddell got 10 points, and that's from pretty good shooting. Liddell had, 42%, and Carton was 83%, 5 for 6 shooting. But if we look into the advanced stats, we can actually see a more telling story. We can see that Carton actually is only +0, plus-minus, and EJ Liddell is -4. The real star of Ohio State is actually Kyle Young, +16. Now again, if you just look at his basic counting stats, you see that Kyle Young is the all-rounder that Ohio State really relies on. He got 10 points, 7 rebounds, 4 for 4 from free throws, and that's big. That's really big. And then 4 for 3 shooting for 75%. So Kyle Young is the real star of Ohio State. And yes, the freshmen are really good, but they're still developing. And those plus-minus stats, especially since they scored so well, really show their weakness when it comes to defense. And you can kind of tell that just watching it. Kentucky's a very lengthy athletic team with a lot of stars that could end up in the NBA, whereas Carden and Liddell, just because they're freshmen, are still quite small, haven't bulked up in their bodies yet, but they're still very talented. So now we're going to look at the film and see how Ohio State won offensively. Now that we've looked at the stats, we can look at the video. Now, Ohio State's whole plan coming into this game was to try and beat Kentucky's athleticism. Kentucky's got NBA players all over the court. They're lengthy, they're fast, they're strong, they're athletic. Ohio State doesn't have that sort of caliber athlete. So Ohio State, and this sounds quite reductionist, but they just tried to put their fast players like Carton, Walker, Muhammad onto Kentucky's larger players, their 4s and their 5s. And Ohio State tried to put their big players like Caleb Wesson and Kyle Young onto Kentucky's guards. So by creating that mismatch, it gave them a chance against Kentucky's athleticism. It also caused heaps of fouls, which led to free throws, which led to Ohio State scoring heaps of points off those free throws and eventually winning, as we saw in the stats. So they ran several different types of actions to create these mismatches. The first one was this side on ball. Oh, wrong button. This side on ball into a backdoor pass. So you'll see over here on this weak side right now, we've got Caleb Wesson screening for Mohammed. And they really emphasize that screen. He sets it twice, but he creates that switch. So now we've got a big player on a small player on a big player. Passes it back to Kyle Young. Identify that mismatch in the post, and it leads to a foul. Next clip, you'll see Ohio State run a different action that we'll cover at the end of this video, but it ends up in the secondary action running the same sort of screening action, trying to create that switch. They don't succeed here, but they go with that same sort of pass anyway, and regardless, it opens up a lane for Kyle Young to drive and cause another foul. If you can see how that happens, Kyle Young's player here, this player here, doubles Kyle Young, creating an open lane, or unmarks Kyle Young, who can charge down and cause the foul. Later in the game, with about 6 minutes to go in the half, again, we're running a similar action. This time Liddell was setting the screen, and it succeeds in getting that switch. So now we've got Dwayne Washington on Sestina and a small player on Liddell. Washington notices this and is able to charge down the lane as Sestina tries to switch back to his original assignment. And again, it causes the foul. Again, it's those fouls that lead to free throws. Same thing, we've got a switch over here now. Caleb Wesson's screening for Luther Muhammad. That causes chaos in the backcourt, as now we've got to have to rotate on defense. We go back to Kyle Young to pass it back into that post. He's identified that mismatch again, and it leads to another foul. All those fouls lead to free throws, or eventually lead to free throws in the bonus, and Ohio State can score points off those free throws and eventually get that lead. Another action that they ran was just a simple high switch. So again, ball at the top of the key. Caleb Wesson comes out to create that switch. So now we've got a small player on a big player. Carden is easily able to, put Sestina off his balance and score that 3-point shot. Liddell sets the screen this time, creates the mismatch. Now we've got Luther Muhammad on the center. It causes confusion in the backcourt as players rotate, especially with Caleb Wesson in the dunker spot. And he is able to floater it in. And last clip of this high screening action. Silence on the perimeter. Caleb Wesson sets a screen for Carden that's switching him onto Kentucky's 5. That creates absolute chaos in the backcourt with Kentucky's players having to rotate. Because now we've got CJ Walker's player charging towards Caleb Wesson. Carden identifies that, passes it to Walker, but that takes Luther Muhammad's player off him to Walker. He identifies the open man and shoots the 3 and nails it. So it's again not even that initial action, but it's the secondary action off that play, off that switch that causes mayhem and causes that open 3-point shot. Now the last action that we'll see is this horns into a under the rim rub play. So Ohio State will set up for horns with Kyle Young and Caleb Wesson. And after the initial screen, we'll see this rub play that happens under the rim. So a guard from this ball side will come up and screen for Caleb Wesson. He'll get the ball. Now off here, he can play any sort of action. He can post up and try and get just a post up move and score from there. He can pass it to one of the shooters like Mohammed or Andre Wesson. Or in this case, Kyle Young's player tries to send help or is assigned a defender. And that causes Kyle Young open in the dunker spot and easily gets a layup. This same horns kind of action. This time there's no secondary player, but Kyle Young still sets that screen, and we've got that rub underneath the rim. This time it's set by Dwayne Washington. Opens up Caleb Wesson in the post, just giving him space. That's all that rub's doing. It's just allowing him to create some space to get the ball and maneuver. And this time he's again fouled. Again, it's those fouls. And this time we've got the actual horns action. You'll notice here, Dwayne Washington's going to come and rub for EJ Liddell. He's getting it in the post. Now again, we can start creating mayhem in the backcourt. So everyone's defense is going to have to rotate. DJ Carden's player is trying to help. Creates open shooters somewhere. They just have to find that open shooter. They find it eventually. and Dwayne Washington nails that 3. So again, it's that secondary action off that initial action. They have that horns action, that rub, they feed it into the post, that help defender comes, and it creates an open shooter somewhere else on the floor. Last version of this, again, horns, Kyle Young and Caleb Wesson, as we saw in that first half. That rub action, Luther Muhammad setting it for Caleb Wesson, and it creates that foul. Those fouls, again, create free throws that create points for Ohio State, and they win by 7. Or is it 6? Either way, they win because of those free throws that we saw in the stats. So those are the Ohio State actions that I identified. Side on balls with a backdoor pass by Kyle Young that causes mainly fouls. A high switch that put on players like DJ Carden onto Kentucky's bigs that create open three-point shots or Mayhem in the backcourt to create an eventual open three-point shot. And then this horns play that created a rub underneath the rim that again resulted in fouls or an open three-point shot somewhere on the floor. Now, if you liked any of the output windows, or if you want to see the code window that created this timeline, there'll be links in the description to either watch a video walkthrough or to purchase them. Other than that, thank you very much, and I hope you learned something.